Welcome to the American Committee for U.S.-Russia Accord. My name is James Cardin. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Professor Peter Kuznick, who is a professor of history and the director of nuclear studies at the American University in Washington. He is the author of many books and co-author with Oliver Stone of the excellent Untold History of the United States. Only last week, Peter and some of his colleagues issued what I think is a remarkable document. It was an appeal to Pope Leo the 14th, urging him to convene a global summit to address the questions of peace and nuclear disarmament. So to talk about this, Peter's been kind enough to come on. So Professor Kuznick, I'm going to start by asking you, um, what was the original motivation behind this appeal?
Well, it was actually started by Jack Gilroy. Jack is a longtime peace activist, an anti-nuclear activist, a member of Veterans for Peace and New York State Pax Christi, and he drafted an appeal to Archbishop Wester. Wester is the Archbishop for the Santa Fe area. He's been a leading voice in the U.S. Church against war and for nuclear abolition. So Jack's letter to Wester that I became involved with uh, asked Wester to reach Pope Leo and urge him to convene a summit of, at minimally, Trump, Putin, and Xi to get us off this path of war. I was in Italy for an alternative university program the last couple of weeks called Tono L'Estate. And Cardinal Ray, who's the dean of the College of Cardinals, was supposed to be there, but he was under the weather. He's 90 years old. But Cardinal Semeraro, who's in charge of sanctification, was there. And I spoke with him. He and I were both speakers at the conference. And I gave him Jack's letter to Archbishop Wester, which he promised he would deliver to the Pope. But then I realized, so now we're past the Wester initiative. So I drafted a new one that was going to have a dual effect. One, it was going to be educational. It's going to explain why we have such a sense of urgency, why we're so concerned right now that either the Ukraine war or the Iran war could turn nuclear. And I could go into some of that background. So it was going to have that, but it was also a direct appeal to Pope Leo. Since the appeal to Archbishop Wester had already been gone beyond with the direct letter to the Pope, now we wanted to have this direct appeal to the Pope. So some of my colleagues and I, including Jack Gilroy and Ivana Hughes and some other folks, then got it out very, very broadly. And we put it up on the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation Substack called Nuclear Insanity, and we've been getting lots of endorsements from leaders around the world, as well as from ordinary citizens. So we're trying to build this as a mass movement to try to say, let's get off this insane path of war, both in terms of Ukraine and in terms of Iran and in terms of the Pacific, because just the last 2 weeks you had uh, Elbridge Colby, who's the policy chief at the Pentagon, say that if there's fighting in the Pacific, the United States should rely on tactical nuclear weapons. This is being so openly discussed. So in my appeal, I start off by quoting Tulsi Gabbard, who said in uh, on June 10th of last year, or that she said on June 10th that the that the world is closer to nuclear annihilation today than it's ever been. She starts off this video in Hiroshima, says that the weapons used in Hiroshima are peanuts compared to the weapons we have today. And then Sergei Narishkin, the head of Russia's SVR, Foreign Intelligence Agency, said that this is the most fragile moment for human civilization since World War II, and the risk of of World War is great. We've got so many of these kind of comments, and you put that together with the Bullet of the Atomic Scientist, which you know well, has been writing articles saying that there's a new school of nuclear strategists who believes that a nuclear war can be fought and won. Then you've got Admiral Thomas Buchanan saying more recently that the United States can win a simultaneous three-front nuclear war against Russia, China, and North Korea and still have enough weapons in reserve to maintain U.S. global hegemony. This kind of madness is out there, and you've got Trump, who's in a desperate situation over Iran. And we know Marjorie Taylor Greene broadcast this, but we know from other sources also that there is some serious contemplation being given to using tactical nuclear weapons in Iran because everything else has failed. And Besant's call for economic warfare is going to fail also. And then you've got people to Putin's right who are putting pressure on Putin to be much more aggressive against Ukraine and to use nuclear weapons there. We've talked about Karganov, Medvedev, and others also. So we're just at a breaking point where if we don't have some dramatic intervention to get us off this path of war and nuclear war, it might be too late. Because once that starts, there's no turning back. Right now, we can stop it before it gets to that point.
Right. I think one of the things that the text of your appeal shows is how far in the wrong direction we Americans have traveled since the Cold War. So you note in the appeal that Pope Paul the Sixth was the first pope to address the UN in 1965, and he quoted John F. Kennedy,
Yeah.
who said, "Mankind must put an end to war, or war will put an end to mankind." Fast forward to 2025, and as you noted, Narishkin, who's the head of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, is sounding similar warnings, right, in similar language.
And Pope
The
Leo,
world is now
part,
experiencing.
part of
Go
the reason we directed this appeal to Pope Leo is he's called for an end to war and he's called for nuclear abolition.
ahead.
And the Holy See was the first state to sign on to the TPNW, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear War, and at the United Nations. So they've actually taken strong stands. What we're saying is the moment this is such a crisis right now that we need more than just statements. We need to actually convene an emergency meeting because one of the models that we used, and Jax lays this out really nicely in his original letter, was that Pope John the 23rd intervened at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis and made a strong appeal for a peaceful resolution, which Khrushchev later pointed to as saying it gave him some of the moral cover to back down in the Cuban Missile Crisis rather than instigate World War III. And so we're saying that a papal appeal, which worked or had an impact like that sort in 1962, can possibly be issued at a moment when both Putin and Trump could seize upon it because both wars are going terribly. I mean, Russia is still making gains on the battlefield, and there's even speculation that CIA Director Ratcliffe's visit to Moscow might have been, which just occurred yesterday, might have been triggered by the fact that Russia might be near victory in Ukraine. But I think we've got to end this war before, even if Russia doesn't achieve victory, we need to end these wars. In the nuclear age, war is not the answer. And we see this now very graphically. The fact that the strongest country in the world, the United States, cannot defeat Iran, given the asymmetric warfare and drones and artificial intelligence and other means. And the fact that Russia, in 5 years, has not been able to defeat Ukraine. So the two strongest countries in the world have not been able to achieve military victory on the battlefield. It shows me that we have to be creative enough and humane enough to go back to diplomacy. and use diplomacy, which became a dirty word under Biden and is even more so under Trump now. So I think we're at a moment when maybe this kind of appeal could resonate. That's the risk we're taking because we don't see anything else right now. We're also calling on Guterres and the head of the Russian church, and to a lot of we've got a lot of Muslim, very prominent Muslim signers. So we want the religious leaders, we want the political leaders, the military leaders, because you look at Europe now, as you know as well as anybody, the European leaders are banking on more war, trying to make sure that Ukraine does not settle and resolve this war. You've got European military leaders, France's leading general, General Fabien Mandon, saying that the problem with telling the mayors in France that the problem with the mayors and the French people is they don't want to lose their sons in a war. They don't want to lose their sons and daughters. Well, the French know what that means because in World War I, they lost 50% of young men between the ages of 15 and 30. This is not an abstract issue to people in Europe, but instead of looking for diplomacy, they're all trying to build up their militaries, vastly increase military spending, taking money out of education, healthcare, food programs, and to giving it to their militaries. This, again, is the madness of our planet at this moment, but we need to go in a very different direction.
What's been the reaction to the letter?
So far, everybody who's read it has, well, at least from what I've seen, the responses we're seeing are effusive. And a lot of people are blasting it out to their networks. So I did the Glenn Deason show, yeah, yesterday or 2 days ago, and it went up today. And some people have sent me the comments on the website, and again, they're effusive. So, I mean, I think this is a very human message. It's not from it's not from the standpoint of the United States or Russia or China or Lula's brilliant efforts in Brazil. It's an attempt to say we need leaders who speak for the planet, not to make Russia great again, or America great again, or China great again, or India great again, but to say, as a planetary civilization, we're under an extreme threat right now, and that we've got to think in terms of the things that unite us as human beings, rather than things that divide us as member of this religion, or this country, or that country. And you see the kind of threats from Scott Bessent and Trump constantly. And, that's exactly the opposite of what the world needs right now.
I agree. I was wondering if maybe I could finish up by asking you a question a little bit removed from the context of the appeal.
Sure.
And I don't think that, I don't want to describe you how in a way that you don't want to be described. But I mean, it seems to me that you're a man of the left and you have very distinguished men of the left who have signed on to this letter as well. Richard Falk, Norman Solomon, a lot of other people. And I was wondering if I could get your opinion or your thoughts on what seems to be a movement among younger progressive foreign policy activists and practitioners and wannabe practitioners. Um, there seems to be among, Gen X and millennial people of the left, this idea that the United States needs to be in the forefront of a new Cold War as a leader of the global democracies against what they term the global autocracies. So, in other words, the democracies have to fight kleptocracy, oligarchy, authoritarianism everywhere around the world. And it seems to me to be kind of a new divide in the world that doesn't need more division. And I was wondering, what you make of it, because the concerns that you and Richard Falk and the rest of your co-signers lay out seem to me to be the proper concern of a um, left or progressive foreign policy. That is matters of war and peace. What do you make of this? Have you seen, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah, sure, I
I,
get it.
well, I was wondering what you make of it as someone who is, someone who's been, with Oliver Stone and people like that, a longtime thought leader of left foreign policy in the United States.
Let me just say, I strongly believe in democracy. In some ways, I'm a more radical Democrat. I don't like to see repression. I don't like to see control of the media by these corporate conglomerates. Um, I just learned today about Axel Springer buying the Telegraph in Britain with the plans to effectively replace Fox News in the United States with this new right-wing platform. I don't like to see speech cracked down on in Russia or in China or anywhere else, because Oliver Stone and I are able to do the untold history of the United States and get it out broadly without being repressed. And I think that's one of the great things about the United States is that we can have these discussions and have these debates. But that said, that's a fight for another day in some ways, or a fight to go on simultaneously. If we don't prevent nuclear war, we're not going to have a future in which we could even try to make things better. We live in a world in which the richest six people have more wealth than the poorest 4 billion, and they're gaining more by the day. Such injustice, the horrors in Gaza. You know, we can't turn our blind eye to these things. We need to fight on every front at once. But if we don't have a planet, and if we don't have a future as a species, because the immediate existential threat is the threat of nuclear war. And some people say, oh, well, they might just lob one or two nuclear weapons at each other, and then it'll stop. But the Pentagon has been trying to war game limited nuclear war for decades, and they're never able to end it. It always ends up in a planetary conflagration. And so we can't even consider this. Jonathan Schell made a brilliant argument back in 1982 in Fate of the Earth about the immorality of even contemplating using nuclear weapons and triggering what he understood then, and what Carl Sagan and others understood as nuclear winter. I was very gratified to see that Robach and Toon, two of the leading scientific experts in the world today, have been warning about nuclear winter, both signed on to our appeal very, very early. We've got a lot of scientists around the world who are interested in this and providing assistance and appreciating how dangerous this moment is. So I do think that democracy is very important, uh, not in a weaponized way, the way that Biden tried to use it to isolate Russia and China and other countries, but in an inclusive way to try to bring more people into taking responsibility for their own lives and their own futures. And so our appeal is meant on that grassroots level, as well as an appeal to leaders right now. Uh, but what strikes me as so urgent before anything else is we've got to get off the path of war and the path of nuclear war. And I don't see the Europeans doing this, except for maybe Sanchez. And I don't see a lot of this kind of thinking out there. Lula has taken some initiative. Lula reached out in a phone call with Trump just a couple of days ago. He's also reached out to Putin and Xi to call for an emergency UN meeting to deal with these issues. We saw Ratcliffe, the CIA director in the US, visiting Moscow yesterday. It's extraordinary. Hasn't happened since Burns back in 2021. Nobody seems to know for sure what that was about, but the Vatican representative, Paul Gallagher, was just there right before Ratcliffe was there. India's got top diplomats going to Moscow now. We see a lot of energy internationally, which I'm hoping is a recognition of how dangerous the moment is. But we're not getting printouts. We're not getting very much information on what's being said at these meetings. And I know that Putin understands the situation, certainly a lot better than I do. And uh, but it's clear to me and to growing numbers of people that this is a crucial inflection point potentially in world history, and we've got to be on the right side of it. I sometimes cite the movie On the Beach. Great 1959, Gregory Peck. Uh, Anti-nuclear war movie about a nuclear war that occurs, and the nuclear fallout spreads all over the planet. And the last pocket of humanity is in Melbourne, Australia. And they show as they're waiting to be annihilated also from the radiation, they have the Salvation Army rally there with a big banner. There's still time, brother. And they show people in inveighing against how could we be so stupid as to blow ourselves off the face of the earth? But the last scene of the movie shows that banner again. There's still time, brother, and there's nobody there. And I don't want us to be in that position of, wishing we had done something when it's too late. As long as we're here, it's not too late. As Kennedy said, we created all these problems. We can uncreate them. And Kennedy also said when he signed the first nuclear arms control treaty in 63, he cited the old Chinese proverb that a journey of 1,000 miles must begin with a single step. And he said, let us take that step. We could do it, but we're running out of time. And the momentum is going in a very, very different direction right now.
Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me
I
and
appreciate
for
it.
all the good work you do.
Thanks a lot.